Yeah. Thank you, Pallavi, for making time for us and agreeing to talk to us about whatever you feel about British colonization and its impacts. As you know, AFPC mainly is trying to build a think tank where we create dialogues with educators, researchers, and people working in this field, and actually even just people who feel passionately about history and history of colonization in general. So it's really important, it's high time to talk about these things and initiate dialogues. And we are also trying to bring some change in the reparations movement and make it stronger in some sense. So I think we can begin by you telling a bit about yourself and your background and what you work about. So yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me. It's a very fascinating platform, and I'm more than happy to talk about my experience and my interest in the history of colonization and the partition. So, I've been a journalist for over a decade, and inadvertently, as in, like, colonization was something that was taught to us in school, in college. I have a bachelor's in history, so it was very much a part of my course. And but as a journalist, we tend to deep dive a lot into even like the most simplest of issues that are rising in India. And so yeah, like that's how my interest started. I've been a journalist for over 10 years, and I mostly cover civil rights issues, democratic processes, like crackdown on journalists, press freedom, minority issues, and reporting for international media that requires a lot of contextual information, which is why I read up a lot about colonization, because it is a part of our history right now, as in, like, it is a part of our present right now. Like, it was a history and it continues to impact us. So that's like more or less the kind of space that I come from.
So yeah, as you said that like every one of us have been introduced to the topic of colonization or the concept of colonization in some way or the other. So as you grew up and you started working and in your field, there is always some kind of first hand experience that we get while we work in the career that we chose for ourselves. So what were the initial impacts of colonization, I mean initial realizations regarding colonization or the impacts of colonization that you felt? Since we are from South Asia, there is a very deep impact of colonization in our livelihood, in our lifestyle, and even in our mindset. So, what were your thoughts about that when you were working mostly on field?
Right. I think, like, on field, and even so, I'm from Uttarakhand. First of all, it's like a northern India Himalayan state, and like, I'll just give an example from my state. Like, just on the basis of its geography and topography, Uttarakhand has like a lot of dams. And over the years, I've covered a lot of climate disasters, a lot of, like, unfortunate incidents that's led to the deaths of like hundreds of people, and all of it is connected to the building and construction of dams across like this Himalayan state. And Indian Himalayas are, I think, like, by one estimate, the most fragile mountainous ecosystem in the world. And in this space, like, dams were built, but the dams actually came from the British. And it was meant to like, apparently control flooding and protect the people. But in reality, the dams were actually like used to exploit South Asian water resources, and like, divert the water sources to colonizer settlements in South Asia. So like, dams have been built for that purpose, and it's peddled as like this construction to protect people, but it's actually not. It's the construction of dams, in fact, in one part of my state, the construction of a dam sunk one entire district. So like, it's led to a lot of harm to local communities. Then like, this is the impact of colonization in like my own hometown where I'm from. And then like, as a journalist, I tend to look at colonial laws that govern Indian lives today, like, when it comes to clamp down on civil liberties or journalistic freedoms of expressions. Like, these were the very laws that were used by the British to crack down on Indians, on Indian freedom fighters, who were demanding independence. So it's very important for me to know this really, like these really, like basic information about colonization, because we see it reflective, we see it reflected in, like our daily lives, like in the way like our structures or institutions are built, or how our laws and policies are created. And even, like something as basic as health, for example, I'm a big fitness freak, and I have a family history of diabetes. And in India, like it's so common, like every other person has diabetes. And India is, like unofficially the diabetes capital of the world. And my father passed away a couple of years ago of diabetes. I'm pre diabetic. And over the years, in my research, I found out that the South Asians' tendency to get diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and cholesterol issues is actually connected to colonization itself. So, like every part of our lives, like from work to the spaces that we inhabit, like our homes and our bodies, everything is linked to colonization. So this is how, in your face, the impact has been of colonization.
Right. I mean, it's really fascinating, and it's kind of scary that even after, almost 80 years of independence, there are still so many layers of, I mean, we have internalized the whole thing, and it
Yeah.
has been affecting us on a daily basis in direct ways, in indirect or subtler ways, but it is there. It is always there. So, yeah, that is definitely one thing. And I think connected to this earlier question is my next question, which in which I want you to talk about the legacies of British colonization. I mean, obviously, the legacies are mostly negative in the field that we are talking about, and economic inequalities or intergenerational trauma that we have, gained from. Unfortunately, from the colonization and partition much later. So, what are your thoughts on that? Probably economic inequalities, and then colorism,
Mm.
racism, territorial or environmental damages, as you mentioned. So all of these are, part of that. So would you like to talk about that? Or I think when we chatted about, when we initially chatted, you were telling me something about your family history regarding partition.
So my family wasn't directly impacted, as in like from my family history, like there wasn't any direct impact from the partition. We're from the hills, as in like historically, my ancestors came from Rajasthan, but they've been in the Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand belt for a while. And I think like the most direct story of partition that I heard was that. Like we live in an area which where a lot of Muslims used to live, and the story goes that, like when the partition happened, a lot of them ran away, and basically they sold their lands at throwaway prices, including to my family as well. And they essentially just left their homes and their land. And this is an area, like this is a deeply like agricultural part of Uttarakhand, like there's nothing but like mountains and farms. So they like, this is how far, like even in the most remote corners of, like the country, like Muslims just fled and they went to Pakistan. So I think that's been like the most direct impact of the partition in my family. But like the stories of partition are all around us, like in the in the most popular institutions. Like for example, I went to Delhi University to for my college. And like there's this very popular market area called Kamla Nagar. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Kamla Nagar has some of the most, like pre-partition like food stalls, or like families who migrated to India, Punjabi families who migrated to India, and who, like set up their establishments, but the ingredients, the food that they use is originally from Pakistan. So, like every other, like you turn any way and there is a partition story around us.
Yeah. So, I mean, although you do not have any intergenerational traumatic incident in your family line, we have, I mean, we have no option rather than coming across these stories or like around us, or in the field of our work. So how do you think the current South Asian population is responding to colonization or the history of colonization? Or like, what are your thoughts on the consciousness or awareness regarding colonization amongst ourselves?
Right. I think South Asians, like remarkably, and this is something that I realized just like last year when Rishi Sunak became the Prime Minister of the UK. And I was talking to historians about because like all Indians were getting like specifically not enraged, but like like there were Kohinoor was trending, for example. And I was just like, because like Indians are like, we're incredibly aware as people of British colonization, like in like monuments, when like Indians see that the foreigners are being like, white foreigners are being charged extra, we're just like, oh yeah, like they exploited us for that long, they might as well pay extra for a national monuments. But like it borders on like, I wouldn't say there's a lot of hostility, I'd say that there is a lot of awareness, and it even like borders on like some self-deprecatory humor to some extent. But yeah, like there I until last year I didn't realize that the British actually don't see colonization as that. Like they are incredibly proud of, like when Queen Elizabeth died, for example, they were really sad because it was just like, oh, like the last of the golden years of whatever, like the British empire. And like they were just like BBC and like all the like international media were like waxing eloquent about her. And I remember that's when Kohinoor started trending, and that really like, and that was just like, like one of the, like that just showed how much South Asians remember, like how South Asians remember colonization, which is with a lot of bitterness. It is with a lot of awareness, because our history books cover that. Our history books actually quite elaborately detail how much the British stole, how violent they are. Like that part of the history has been like detailed like since our school, and we all grow up incredibly aware of like this golden period of India and how it was, and how British basically like drained the South Asian, like the subcontinent, out of all of its wealth. And so yeah, like I think like we come from that space of acknowledgement and awareness. But at the same time, there's also been a lot of like attempts to whitewash this part of the history, obviously, like by saying that it was a British colonization that's quote unquote civilized South Asia. But that's completely not true. Like like one thing that I really like to think about is, like this typical Indian bureaucracy that a lot of people often say that, oh, it's like so typically Indian, but it's actually like British. Like all this bureaucracy and the red tapeism and all of that was brought in by the British. So like so this is what really like whenever I do some reporting, and like people say that, oh, but like this is so Indian. And like even things like, oh, Indians are so jugadu, like Indians do a lot of like DIY to just like go by their daily lives. And I'm just like, that's survival, man. Like that's just like decades and decades of like surviving through absolutely like little to no resources or means. So I think like that's, and Indians acknowledge that, like a lot of Indians, we know that this is where it's coming from, and we know that but yeah, like because of this greenwashing, a lot of like slowness in Indian democracy, of course, like it's been acquired over time with successive governments as well. But I think like it originally came from the British system of bureaucracy, and all of that wasn't to like civilize South Asia. All of it was built and created to essentially enslave and like tame South Asians and be like the colonized.
Yeah, I mean, even today in this era of like saffronization of everything, that part of history is kind of being kept intact. But
Exactly.
sadly enough, from the CBSE, curriculum, the
Yeah.
chapter on partition has been removed, and the chapter on partition, and I think there was a piece on the Gujarat riots that was
Mm.
removed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is a time of staying very conscious, regarding our own history. And
That is
because
true. Yeah.
mhm, the
No, no,
kids
no.
who are studying now, or like would study from a couple of years later, they would not, I mean, they are not studying it, and they would never know that something like this happened.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think today it's really threatening, kind of, to kind of I mean, restore the history, or stay conscious about whatever is happening around us, because so many of us are being brainwashed so easily. So
That is sorry,
hmm,
I just wanted to add that, like,
hmm,
you're absolutely right. Like, this
hmm,
rewriting of history is
hmm, hmm,
particularly disturbing because it not just, like, the entire exercise of rewriting the history has been to, like, show like the Mughal Empire as, like, the OG invaders or colonizers, like, and much worse than the British colonizers. So it's a very dangerous narrative that's playing out, and obviously it plays into the ongoing and the current politics, which is, and it's leading to, like, it's led to, like, large scale Islamophobia and whatever you see in the country right now.
and I mean, education is a very important pillar of understanding our own history. And uh, when I was talking to people, I mean, South Asians who are residing in UK, there is a different problem. I mean, colonization is not taught at all there.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's, I mean, it's completely a different problem. So I mean, South Asians have to be injected the history of South Asia in a different way, so that they know where they're coming from or what their history was. So that's the thing.
right. It is, yeah, it is incredible how this history is just, like, not taught in UK schools, because literally the empire impacted more than half the world. Like, it's insane. I mean, it's willful ignorance on their part,
Mhm.
because,
Mhm.
yeah, but yeah, like, it was pretty mind blowing when I found out that they just don't teach this side of the history
Yeah.
to the British.
And even like even today, there are certain places which are still under colonization, like technically.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
There's a
really.
fascinating book by this author called Satnam Sanghera. It's called Empire Land, and he
Mhm.
basically talks about how colonization impacted British as well in, like, very, like, different ways. For example, there were a lot of, like, South Asian words that were introduced to the British dictionary because of colonization. Loot is an English word, but it's originally a
Mhm.
South Asian term. So like, it's a very fascinating, like, the other side of yeah, colonization.
Right, right. Definitely interesting. The impacts in like everything, from starting from language to food
Yeah.
to everything. Um, okay, so to advance with our next question, what to you is the concept of decolonization, or what constitutes decolonization in our current, scenario?
I think it's very essential for those who want to decolonize first to read about what it means. Because, like, just like the rewriting of history, the concept of decolonization has also been co-opted. So, like, first of all, as in, like, when you talk about decolonization, you should talk about the institutions that were built by colonization, and then, like, resisting those institutions. For example, police brutality, very much a colonization, like, the impact of colonization happened during colonization, continues to happen in India right now, but we don't see much like, public outcry, like, in our country. Like, when you talk about police brutality, you instantly, like, even a South Asian will think of Black Lives Matter. What, you don't talk about, like, police brutality. It's police brutality is something that's, like, it's a part of our lives. But, like, to me, like, decolonization is to acknowledge what institutions were built during colonizations, and then, like, to like, try to change it in some way or the other. And I think, like, that can only happen with education. But then the biggest challenge to the process of decolonization, in my opinion, is, like, it's connected to the rewriting of history, where decolonization has been co-opted by certain interest groups who, like, want to, whose idea of decolonization, again, like, takes them back to, like, this narrative of Muslim invaders, and changing, like earlier, like, when Indian governments were changing cities names, for example, they were changing British names to, like, Indian names. But now they're changing, like, Muslim names to, like, in Hindu names. So, like, I feel like the language of decolonization and the process of decolonization is getting co-opted really fast, especially on social media, where people are just not educated enough to understand the context. And people who don't understand South Asian history or South Asian context, for example, South Asian communities in the US, right? Like, where when you talk about caste over there, they instantly talk about, oh, like we need to decolonize from this, and like this is anti-Indian, anti-Hindu, and all of that. So I feel that decolonization, the process itself, starts from education, and yeah, yeah, as in, like, yeah, just be aware of, like the movements that are co-opting this like very radical movement.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as if we don't recognize the problem, then it's difficult to arrive to the
Yeah,
solution. So
exactly.
yeah. um what are your thoughts about, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh asking for a uh, reparation scheme? Like in the Caribbeans, we are seeing CARICOM is doing a wonderful job, in getting together the clauses that it wants fulfilled by the reparations policy. So, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, uh, regarding the concept of reparations, what constitutes reparations in the first place? Because it's not just some monetary value that one can pay back to us and it can be done. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so far, like successive Indian governments have not been able to address it, probably because of, like trade and diplomatic relationships. They don't want to ruin it. I think like Indian parliamentarian Shashi Tharoor is the only one who's, like in the mainstream platform and very articulate. Like he's brought up the issue of reparations as not just being about money, but just like bare minimum of acknowledgement, which the British governments haven't done. And I think like when it comes to, even like returning of like South Asian artifacts, that is also, I feel like, really bare minimum. But yeah, like when you talk about reparations, I feel like the conversation is missing in India. I was very surprised to see this conversation in Pakistan last year when the super floods happened, and super floods, like over there, all the, like Pakistan, I think, is home to one of the largest number of glaciers in the world, and they also have this British system of dams, which are, like wreaking havoc on its ecology. And but when the super floods happened, a lot of their ministers asked for reparations, and they asked for, like colonial justice. I mean, this is a rare moment for a South Asian country to, like talk about colonization, and also, like how it's continued to impact its, like the environment and economy and politics and everything. So I think like the conversation has been missing. But again, like when I think about reparations, I do feel that South Asian countries need to, like bring up this issue as, like with some form of unity. b- yeah, and I think that it all eventually falls on the civil rights, like civil justice organizations, because I don't think our politicians are motivated enough to bring this up as a topic. I mean, like in recent years, our current prime minister has said that he has absolutely no interest in Kohinoor. And like when, like when Indian asks for Kohinoor, we're not asking for, like the diamond. I mean, it's also a myth that it's the biggest diamond that existed in the world's history. That's an absolute myth, because Kohinoor has come to symbolize, like the scale of the loot that the British took. So yeah, like Modi saying that that he's not interested in Kohinoor. Essentially, like it implies that he's not interested in discussing colonization and reparations. And there's just no scope of that. So I do feel that the question of reparations then falls on civil rights groups, and like groups who are talking about colonization and reparations and all of that, and bring it up at parliament. Because like thanks to the colonial legacy, like due to the colonial legacy of corruption and bureaucracy, that conversation has completely been erased from, like the political will. So yeah, like, I think like that's what comes to my mind when I think of reparations.
Right. I mean, whatever you said about the acknowledgement part, that is really, really missing from the whole scene. I mean, even when I'm forgetting the name of the person, he visited Jallianwala Bagh in
Hmm.
Amritsar. He did not even say sorry on behalf of
I think that
they
was
did not
Queen
apologize.
Elizabeth. I think that was Queen Elizabeth a couple of years ago. She came to Jallianwala Bagh and she was just like, oh, that's, like, she basically just said that it's sad that it happened, but she
Sad.
didn't say
Hmm.
who did it.
Hmm.
It's yeah, it's a typical colonizer narrative. Like the framing of it, the language of it,
and
or an
and these
expression.
things do not change over the years, so it just
Yeah.
stays the same, the structure in which the whole thing plays out. um, so yeah, I think we are approaching the end of the interview, but I'll just end with two more questions. Number one is, how do you think, I mean, this is a difficult history, be it about partition or colonization, and in the ways in which we have been exploited on various levels over the years, or over like 200 years. So this is a difficult history that can be kind of baffling or overwhelming for children who, I mean, who are not staying in South Asia currently. So how do you think, I mean, I know you're not an educator in that sense, but since you're working with people in general, what are your thoughts? I mean, how can we um, build up awareness amongst children, or tell them this story, tell them this important piece of history that they must know, I mean. So how do you think we can approach this in a more simple or like vital manner?
I think, like, I just want to share one story to talk about how just like basic knowledge of this South Asian history for South Asians is so important for so in my previous job I was with US media outlet Vice News before this, and I worked very closely with Pakistani American journalist Sahar, who was at that point based in Karachi. So it's very interesting. I'm from a city called Dehradun, which is home to Indian Military Academy, which is one of the most, like, elite military academies in the country. And we were just like talking about some random news, and then like during the day she was just like, oh, by the way, where are you from? And I was like, oh, I'm from Dehradun. Like, I didn't expect, like, and she's like born and brought up in San Francisco, who recently moved to Karachi. We're working together on like talk, like South Asian stories. And she was just like, oh, that's interesting. So it turns out that a great grandfather was a part of the British Imperial Army, and he actually graduated from the IMA, like the Indian Military Academy. And I was just like, like, even though we feel that there is absolutely no connection between us, like, this South Asian history basically connects us all. So I just wanted to use this example. Like, I was completely mind blown, like, her family, who she probably has will never like come to Dehradun, or like her family, like her parents and all, they never came to India. But just, like, by virtue of, like, the fact that at some point we were all, like, the same people, there were no borders between us. And a member of her family was actually at some point in my hometown, where lots of like my own relatives also graduated from. So that was, like, that connecting moment. So yeah, so I think, like, South Asians who are wondering why this history of colonization and partition is important to them, it's because it connects all of us. Like, a person you barely know but who's from the other side of the border, that you don't think you have anything common with, you actually have a lot more common with them than your neighbor of like some other ethnic race. So I think, like, that's just a sweet story I like to tell people about why this, it just connects us. I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much love and so much affection that is kind of hidden, and we don't really talk about it, because we all that we are talking about when we talk about Pakistan is how they are bombing us, we are bombing them, and stuff like that. And when a cricket match is happening, if you are supporting, or if you have a crush on a like Pakistani cricketer, you would be ridiculed. So
Yeah.
this is really sad. Um,
Yeah, it
but
just like, it just melts away the boundaries like in one conversation. Like, you just, in fact, I've actually like spoken, or I've interviewed a lot of Pakistanis in my like journalism life, and
Mhm.
nobody, like, even police officials, I've interviewed like police officials from Pakistan in some remote village for some crime story,
Mhm.
like for something. And they are more than happy. Like there is absolutely no animosity. They're just like, oh, you're from here, okay, my ancestors came from here. And like they all want to basically talk about the past. And I think like when you actually talk to people from across the border, there is very like they just forget all the propaganda that's playing on our TV channels. They forget all the animosity and hostility that our governments have created, and we all realize that we're all basically the same people.
Yeah, exactly. And the animosity or the hostility that is, I mean, that is there is basically because we don't, the borders or the political, barriers, they don't really let us, connect.
Yeah,
We,
yeah,
how often do we like really talk to someone from on the other
yeah,
side of the border?
yeah, sorry.
So this human touch is missing, which is why the hostility keeps on increasing.
Yeah.
So, uh, like you were talking about a lot of books during the interview, so do you have any book recommendations for people who are trying to study more about South Asia or British colonization, or maybe some books that you found interesting?
I mean, I am a big fan. Like one thing, not a book, but then I'm a big fan of this podcast called Empire. It's hosted by two historians, William Dalrymple and Anita Anand, and it is absolutely like an excellent source of information on colonization, like every aspect of colonization, British colonization. I'm a big fan. I listen to it every time a new episode comes out. And right now I'm reading a book by Satnam Sanghera. It's called Empire Land. It's
Mhm.
basically about, like the other side of
Mhm.
colonization. And he's a brown guy. He's a brown dude. And until last year, I didn't know that if you bitch about colonization or the British Empire in the UK, you can get arrested or people like troll you. It's yeah. So it's basically like dissing the current government or something in India. So like so over there, like so he actually like roams around with a bodyguard because he talks about how bad the colonization has been for the entire world. So yeah, I decided to read his book, and it's absolutely fascinating, like every bit of it. But yeah, these are the two sources of information I would highly recommend, and then any book by William Dalrymple.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pallavi. It was really nice talking to you. And, ultimately, these are all people's histories. So, and public history that we have not been able to, focus on for a very long time. And now we are finally talking about it. And a lot of people are also talking about the lesser known aspects of partition or the material memory that is associated with partition, which is
Hmm.
really interesting. So, thank you for taking out the time. I hope we can connect again.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Srilagna. Thank you so much.
thank you. I'll
Lovely
just
chat.
end the recording.